Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are thrilled to be able to bring you a combined webinar hosted by Orsid and Howard Rothschild and Rob Schwartz from the RAB. Neil is going to be kicking us off today, but before we get started, I would just like everybody to pay attention to the chat feature and put all of your questions there. We will be answering all of them at the end of today's presentation. Neil?
Thanks, Chelsea. Good afternoon, everyone. Most of you know me. I'm Neil Davidowitz, and I'm president of Orsid. And I'm very excited to be co-hosting this webinar with Howard Rothschild and Robert Schwartz. Rob and Howard, in both of their respective roles, Howard is president and Rob is executive VP and chief operating officer, have led the RAB. Tremendous level of leadership. This is the third contract negotiation I've done with Rob and Howard, and they really bring such a level of gravitas. They are phenomenal negotiators. They represent us well. They are tough, but they negotiate with a level of decency and humanity that's respected by both the RAB members and the union. And I think they've historically had great success. They also bring tremendous tenure in history. Howard is in his 41st year at the Realty Advisory Board. It's hard for me to fathom or believe that there's somebody who's been in the industry longer than I have. I just celebrated my 40th year at Orsid. And Rob Schwartz has been there 11 years. So we are represented really well by them. Not only do they do a phenomenal job in terms of the negotiations, but in the 4 years in between contracts, they do just such a great job representing us on our various mediations, our arbitrations, and all the things we need to do relative to staff. I'm also excited to have with us today Ben Schuman, who's a senior vice president of Orsid. Ben and Laura Krasner have led the Orsid Strike Preparedness Task Force since November of 2025. So we are deep into our preparation in terms of educating our boards, communicating with our boards and our residents to deal with a potential strike. But at this point, I'll turn it over to Howard and Rob, who will cover the first part of the webinar and deals with some of the negotiating issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil, for the kind introduction, and thanks for everyone who's listening for your time and attention. I've been dealing with labor negotiations for 4 decades, and including many contracts with Local 32BJ, not only on the residential side, but the commercial side. And then there are lots of other divisions within 32BJ where we negotiate contracts. Just a little bit of background. The RAB is a multi-employer association. It represents the real estate industry. And in terms of this contract, we represent all types of buildings, co-ops, condos, affordable buildings, rental buildings. It's really a big tent. And we represent about 3,300 buildings, and there are about 34,000 workers. So it's a pretty big negotiation, and it's a great responsibility, and we take that very seriously. The union is Local 32BJ, and we have been negotiating contracts as institutions for about 92 years with 32BJ. I would say generally we have a wonderful relationship. Each party has described the relationship as the gold standard of labor relations. In terms of this contract, we're now at the end of a 4-year agreement, which we negotiated back in 2022. And the way it works is the RAB forms a negotiating committee. Neil, as he said, has been on the negotiating committee for the last 3 or 4 agreements. That negotiating committee meets with the union's negotiating committee. Hopefully we get to a tentative agreement. That tentative agreement then gets ratified on the management side by the RAB residential board and then the RAB full board. It also gets ratified by all of the union members. And then ultimately, it gets ratified by each and every building. So each building has notice of all of the changes in the contract, and then you ultimately decide whether you want to sign on to that contract or not sign on to the contract. You'd be signing a piece of paper called an assent. Next slide. So our bargaining committee is made up of various people. We have third-party management companies. We have people who sit on the board of directors of their particular building. We have Mary Ann Rothman, who's from the Council of Co-ops and Condos. And we also have representatives from rental buildings. And a lot of the people are lawyers, some of their HR people, some labor relations people, and some are operations people. So it's a fairly diverse committee. Our negotiations with 32BJ commenced on March 5th, where they made their big presentation to us, which was nothing has ever been better in real estate in New York City, and that they want big increases and other changes in the contract. We responded to them earlier this week and said, things are not as rosy as you say. There are all sorts of operational issues in terms of compliance. There are lots of sort of runaway costs, and that the mayor has announced that he wants a 9.5% increase in property taxes, although apparently either yesterday or earlier today, he seems to be backpedaling a little bit about that. But in any event, we've sort of started the process. We will continue to meet with them. We have a series of meetings over the next few weeks, probably once a week for about a week or two. And then we sort of ratchet it up and we meet very regular 2-3 times a week. And at the end, we'll be meeting every day and at night if needed. Next slide. So the current agreement, as I said, is the 2022 agreement. This sort of outlines what the economic deal was with the last agreement. The overall agreement was about 3%. We achieved a lot of savings on healthcare. We got some enhancements in our contract in terms of extending the trial period and so on. One of the things that we did in addition to the 3% was there was a one-time bonus of $3,000 really for the dedication of the employees during COVID. That $3,000 was offset by a reduction of about $3,600 that would have otherwise have gone to the health fund. Just to sort of level set, and for those of you who are on the board, you probably know the numbers better than I do, but right now it costs about $62,000 in base pay for a porter or doorman, in wages, but the all-in cost for that employee is about $112,000 a year. For a handyman, it's a little bit more. It's about $68,000 for wages and about $118,000 all in. Superintendents and resident managers are a lot more than that. Next slide. So what do we expect? I think given the fact that we have a very mature collective bargaining agreement, as I said, we've been doing this for 90 years, and we've negotiated really good benefits and really good paid time off. I think the major issue in this contract is going to be wages. And I think they're going to focus on wages. They're going to focus on the fact that it's very hard to live in the city and on $60,000. And That's it's hard to dispute that. There'll be, I think, so the big issue will be wages. I think there'll be some issue in terms of benefits. Where I'm sure we're going to be squabbling a little bit about healthcare, but probably more about pension, and they're probably going to want to enhance the pension benefit. Given what's happening with ICE enforcement around the city, they have proposals about that. And I'm sure we're going to both want to modify various language in the collective bargaining agreement that will either provide more or less scrutiny in terms of the contract regarding what management can and cannot do. Okay, Rob, do you want to start with the do's and the don'ts?
Sure, happy to. While we're all engaged in contractual negotiations, it's important for us to remember that life continues as hopefully usual in the buildings. And we need to be aware, though, in our interactions with our unionized staff that we have to be governed by federal labor law. And one of those rules is that we need to avoid direct dealing with unionized employees because that can result in an unfair labor practice and result in charges in front of the National Labor Relations Board. So what this means essentially is don't discuss the substance of the proposals or negotiations with employees directly. If they come and want to talk to you about it, you can politely decline and direct them back to their union. You should certainly not be making any promises, even if employees are coming up to you and expressing concern about the negotiations. But promises that you make in these situations can be enforceable against you, but not against an employee. And we need to remember to be polite and civil in our personal interactions, no matter how tense the negotiations can be. Next slide, please. So what happens if we're unable to reach agreement? If April 20 arrives and there's no deal on the table, a few possible options. Number one is an extension, otherwise known as stopping the clock. Essentially, what would happen is we're close. We think that an agreement is in the offing, and we say we need another couple of weeks to get it done. So the union and the RAB sign an agreement to extend the current agreement in place for another set period of time. Another one is impasse, which is nobody does anything really. We sit and stare across the table at each other and continue to negotiate, but the contract has expired. And that, of course, leads to the next option, which is job action. Job action meaning a strike, leafleting, picketing. On our end, it could be a lockout, but I don't think that's ever happened in the history of our negotiations. Next slide, please. So what do we do in the event of a strike? It's important to remember that the strike is the economic weapon of the union. It's their way to remove their labor from the building and try and force us to a deal that we don't want to accept. There hasn't been a residential strike since 1991. So what does it mean? It means that the union will pull all employees from residential buildings covered by the apartment building agreement. It's important to note, though, it doesn't mean that they'll pull them from every building. As we saw with the auto workers a few years ago, they can choose to selectively strike buildings while keeping workers employed at other buildings. Building employees may then set up a picket and march in front of the building with signs and leaflets and noisemakers and slogans. And it's important to remember this is generally lost money for workers. They do not get paid, generally speaking, while they're on strike, and this is money that they generally never recover. But all buildings should be prepared, and you should follow the guidance circulated by Orsid New York and by your account executive, because the best way to prevent a strike is to be prepared for the strike. Next slide, please. So this is a question we get a lot. What happens with our superintendent or resident manager if the building goes on strike? Now, the answer is if your superintendent or resident manager is in a building that has less than 6 employees total, that resident manager or superintendent will likely go out on strike with the other rank and file employees. Their expiration is April 20th, the same as those employees. And, in terms of if they live in the building, they have to be given access to their apartment and to the other areas of the building that they would ordinarily have access to. Now, in larger buildings with more than 5 employees, their expiration date isn't until June 20th for resident managers in those buildings. So it means that resident manager or superintendent stays on the job while the rest of the employees go out. But it's important to remember that resident manager cannot perform the work of the employees that are on strike, what's called struck work. What they can do is they can continue to do the work that they have done up to that point. Next slide, please. This is a very important point. As we get down towards the wire here and things tend to get more tense, the union may try to communicate directly with boards of apartment buildings, and they may attempt to divide and conquer with what's known as Me Too agreements and selective strikes, which we talked about a little bit ago. But Me Too agreements are particularly divisive. These are agreements where essentially the union will come to you and say, we'll give you some sort of deal and you will agree to take it. And in exchange, we won't go on strike when we strike all the other RAB buildings. Now, what does that do? It leaves you with a deal that you're going to be bound to regardless of the deal the RAB strikes. And it also undermines our leverage because the more buildings that leave the umbrella here, then the less leverage we have to say that we are the industry, we can command a certain price. So it's very important that we stay away from Me Too agreements to the extent we can. The union also will attempt to turn the tide of public opinion with news and press releases and demonstrations. You will likely see a lot of politicians who take the side of Local 32BJ. You may even, if it comes to it, see a strike. You may see politicians walking on the picket lines with striking workers. But it's important that we must remain united in our position, or we will fall divided. And I think I turn it back over to Neil to handle the operations piece of this.
Thanks, Rob. I just want to stress one thing Rob said, because it comes up probably more often than anything else from buildings and from shareholders and union owners, and that's the Me Too agreement. And sometimes there's this bit of complacency or bit of lack of resolve saying, you know what do we need the aggravation of a strike? We'll sign the Me Too, our guys stay on, they'll be happy with it, we'll be happy with it. I can't tell you that is a serious mistake and undermines Rob's ability and Howard's ability to lead us through these negotiations. It is so important. I want to just repeat what Rob said, to stand together and not execute those agreements. So that's really important. We at Orsid have been preparing, as I said, we put a task force together in November and have been working diligently to get our buildings ready and to get our account executives and our entire team ready. We have 20 Orsid staff members that are part of that task force, and things are going well. But in terms of how we can prepare, let me talk about preparation, because I think Howard touched on this a bit. The importance of preparation is twofold. One is really self-evident and obvious, is that we want to be ready to maintain our building and serve our residents in case there's a strike. But from where I sit, it's equally important to prepare, because that affects the negotiations. The fact that the men in the building know, and women, that we are prepared and we will be able to deal with a strike and continue to operate creates great leverage at the negotiating table. And that filters down. It filters down from the men to the leadership that our buildings are ready, and that's an important component. So I just wanted to speak to that. But in terms of dealing with some of the specific issues that we're dealing with, our resident managers and supers and account executives are to check building systems and make sure building systems are up to date and things are under control. Very important that we test security systems, Our risk management division, led by Eric McPhee, is reviewing again insurance coverage. We're securing equipment. And for those buildings that have opted, and the vast majority have, we've already engaged security guards to add a level of security to all our buildings. We've updated resident lists, really important to understand what your occupancy is and who in fact is residing in your buildings. And as we all know, it's not only the named shareholders and unit owners of record, but it's family members, it's individual, it's babysitters, it's housekeepers, it's caretakers. So we need to know and have those resident lists updated. Where it's applicable, the resupplying of fuel is something we're focused on. And we want to make sure we're prepared to assist the elderly and infirm, and assist them with both egress, access to the building, assist them on their needs, and focused on that. We want to develop protocols, really important, for garbage collection, mail distribution, and packages, and that is going on, as many of you, the boards know, in all the buildings. I remember 1991 well, and I remember that strike well. And the most crucial point of that wasn't our ability to service the building. The single biggest issue was the piling up of trash in the building because the sanitation department would not cross the picket line. And we had to use some innovative ways to get that refuse out of the building and eliminate that issue. And the last thing is to make sure that residents have keys so they can access both their apartments and, where necessary, access the main entrance of the building. Obviously, the key core component to all preparation is we want to continue to operate the building and have it function the way it had been prior to the strike. So boards will be communicating, and we'll be communicating with boards and residents that we'll share with you, that'll come through your account executive, and we'll be passing information on that comes via the RAB. We will have contractors in if necessary to perform emergent and essential repairs. We have, as I said, retained security to ensure access is permitted only to residents and expected guests. Those security guards will not fill the full function of our door personnel, but they are there really for the sole purpose of securing our building and securing our residents. We will need to supplement that security team by engaging resident volunteers who will assist where necessary in terms of mail distribution, garbage, and other things that we may need for those buildings that have manual elevators, service elevators. We will line up volunteers to allow us to continue to operate that building. And the most crucial thing too is ensure that we have resident lists and our communication systems are up to date so we can communicate with all of our residents on an ongoing and efficient manner. Go to the next slide. I'm going to turn this over to Ben Schuman, who has worked really, really hard preparing all the details and dealing with the minutia. And a lot of what we're able to do for our buildings is general. We're doing it across the board, but a lot of it is individualized and personalized as different buildings are staffed and function and operate differently. So we obviously have our generic models, and then those need to be customized to meet the needs and desires of each building and each board. But Ben can speak to that with greater detail. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, as Neil was saying, we reestablished from 4 years ago a strike task force in November that has been meeting on a regular basis. I am part of the leadership of it, along with Executive Vice President Laura Krasner. There are approximately 20 full-time Orsid staff members involved in the operations of the task force. filling various functions, preparing various portions of our response. And it has been a very good, very strong collaborative effort. The task force members have been working on all sorts of things, such as client and internal communications about the strike procedures. All those letters and things that have gone out have been coming from the task force. Also helping to arrange for continuation of building business operations to the extent possible in the event of a strike. This is things like arranging, coordinating with security companies, procedures in dealing with refuse and recycling, and coordination of resident volunteers. The account executives for your buildings will be in constant communication with each board and resident if there is a strike, to ensure that the preparedness is, that the building is fully prepared. Trying to keep everybody up to speed and up to date is really going to be one of the things that we're going to be focused on. And the members of the strike task force will be communicating with the account executives across the portfolio to make sure that happens. We have some additional communication coming out. Right now, most of our buildings are distributing a resident communication notice that helps to get a strike ID card, and there will be a strike prep manual that will be coming out very soon. So as we moved on to this slide, so the resident contact information, this is the memo that is currently being distributed by most of our account executives. If yours hasn't sent one out yet, now they will be doing so soon. Basically, the way this works, it's personalized. This is the template version. It's personalized for each building, and then there is a QR code and a link included in them. Residents can scan the link or click on the ID card, click on the link or scan the QR code, and it takes you to a form to where you can enter your information. And once you enter your information and a strike ID card is emailed to you, you can save it, you can print it and carry it in your pocket, or you can save it as a screenshot on your phone so that you can show it to a security guard in the event that you need it. Next slide, please, Chelsea. So when you click on that link or scan the QR code, it does take you to the Microsoft forum where you're asked a series of limited questions, such as your name, apartment number, contact information, and emergency contact information. When you get to that form, you should do one for yourself, but you should also do one for each apartment occupant, including children who will need independent access to the building in the event of a strike. So if you have a teenager who will come and go, the guards, security guards, are not going to know who they are. So they should have one of these cards as well. Also, very important is to register domestic employees, nannies, housekeepers, dog walkers, so that they can get in as well as expected frequent guests. Everyone should fill out one of the links, and you can fill it out for them, or you can have them do it. And as long as their email is included in the submission, they will get a copy of the ID card. In addition, account executives and the resident managers or supers and the front desk staff will be available to help people who are elderly or not computer literate to submit the profile information. So we've each account executive is working with their building staff to make sure that if they're not comfortable with or capable of using the link or scanning the QR code, that they have other options. They're also going to have additional ID cards, and if need be, the resident can go up to the front desk, have the staff member submit their information, and then hand them a card. So we've covered as many bases as we can to make sure that the building residents can collect the ID card that they would need to have with them. Chelsea? So this is an example of what the ID cards look like. You'll be able to either, like I said, once you submit, this will be emailed to you. It will have the 3-digit Orsid building code on it for each building. So it is personalized, and the security guards for each building will be looking for this ID card. When you walk in, all you need to do is basically show it to them, and you should be able to get access. If you, for some reason, have not registered and there is a strike, there will be an opportunity to register and get it emailed to you after the strike has begun. The security guards will be able to have information there to allow you to do so. No scanning is required, and that's very important because scanning can be contingent upon the use of internet and so forth. So this is a passive solution that will provide access to the building. Chelsea. So at this point, that is the basic procedure that we've got in operation. I'm going to actually pass it back to Neil to summarize our process.
Great. So the summary is simple. Howard and Rob and our 20-member negotiating team is all systems a go, and starting Monday, the contracts and negotiations become very, very serious, and will continue through the next 21 days through contract termination until the end of the contract. So we'll be working through April 20th. The goal really is to serve our members well and negotiate a deal that is both fair and reasonable to our staff, but fair and reasonable to all the residents that we represent in light of rising costs in so many areas relative to our buildings. If a strike should happen, as you can see from this webinar and you can see from the material coming out, we are prepared, our buildings are prepared, our resident managers are prepared to navigate all the various components of a strike. And if there is one, we will deal with it as it commences. I'm the eternal optimist, so don't go by me. I'm hoping that we will negotiate a fair and reasonable contract and there will not be a strike, but we need to be ready in case one transpires. And at this point, I think we've wanted to leave sufficient time to respond to any questions that came up and be able to address whatever is on you're concerned with. So Chelsea, I'll go back to you or to Ben to actually read out those questions.
Thank you, Neil, Howard, Rob, and Ben. Very much appreciate it. We have a handful of questions that we will be going through, starting back at the top when we were discussing wages. Two specific questions. One is, what about tax-free tips given to the staff? What does that amount to?
Well, I guess the short answer is I really don't know. My guess is that most residents don't give the employee a 1099 of this tip, and most employees don't report the tip on their tax forms. So it's hard to tell. I would also think that it varies widely amongst buildings, and it varies widely amongst employees. The contract that we're negotiating has nothing at all to do with tips. If you want to be generous to your employees, that's up to you. If you don't want to give any tips, that's also up to you. The contract is the minimum requirement that the building is obligated to pay the employee for wages and benefits. The only sort of tips that I think might be reported is if it doesn't go, let's say, from the resident directly to the employee, but rather if the building has some sort of communal fund that's paid on the record from the building to the employee, then that bonus might appear and it might be reported. But quite frankly, the short answer is, I don't know. That's a very long way of saying, I don't know.
Thanks, Howard. And another question on wages, is the union pension plan a defined benefit or defined contribution plan?
So the answer is yes. There is a defined benefit plan, and there also is a defined contribution plan. Into the defined benefit plan, you pay about $7,000 a year for your employees who work more than 1,000 hours a year. The defined contribution plan costs you about $500 a year.
Thank you. Can we compensate resident volunteers for their time?
Rob, do you want to take that one?
You are able to replace striking workers. So if you want to compensate your residents, they become workers, and you better be prepared to put them on payroll. My best advice on this is don't compensate volunteers. Keep it as a volunteer and keep things simple.
I concur with Rob. In 1991, there were no individual shareholders or unitors who were compensated in Orsid buildings relative to their volunteer role during that strike.
Thank you. Some questions about trash and recycling. If it's piled up on the curb, sanitation will pick it up, or will that be given to the security guards, and are recycling rules in effect in the event of a strike?
So the security guards will not pick up trash. They're security guards, they're not porters. In terms of will the Department of Sanitation pick up the trash, I would say if there's no picket line there, generally yes. If there's a picket line, some people would not want to cross the picket line. If trash becomes a really big problem, what happened in 1991 is we went into court, had a health emergency declared, and if sanitation people wanted, there was essentially a police escort to pick up the garbage.
We actually, for many Orsid buildings, we have arranged for the delivery of dumpsters. With Royal Carting, we've coordinated. Many buildings have opted in to have them delivered in the event a strike occurs, so that residents can dispose of their trash that way, so it doesn't pile up inside the building with no one to be able to handle it.
I mean, that's a great idea, Ben, because the problem that existed in 1991, and by the way, 2026 is we're a world apart from 1991. In 1991, we communicated like through beepers and fax machines, and some people on the call may not even know what those things are, but garbage was put out in plastic bags, and those plastic bags got shredded by the picketers. So having containerized trash, prevents that. So that's a great idea.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does all of this add significant remuneration to doormen?
I guess the answer to that question would be, we'll see. I mean, I would say, over the last several contracts, we've had, overall increases pretty much plus or minus about 3%. So if you sort of talk about a significant amount, I don't know. Do you think 3% is a significant amount? My guess is this deal may be a little bit higher than previous deals, but really there's no way of knowing. We're still in March. We have a lot of runway to go before the plane lands. It asked me this question on April 21st, and I probably will have a much more specific answer.
And also, Howard, to your point, when you're talking about 3% or 3.5% or 4%, you have to think about that in relation to what the base is, and the base is $62,000 in terms of wages. There's a significant amount of money, as Howard articulated, expended on the benefit side, but the base wage today is 60. Is it 62 or
yes,
for a porter or a doorman?
Thank you. Will the communications to residents reference the ability to get the ID without going through the QR code?
Yes. The memo that went out indicates that we also directed the account executives to send paper copies to the building as well, to be distributed either in mailboxes or under doors. And in addition to that, we provided signs that they could use or customize that they could put in various areas around the building, by the mailboxes, laundry room, elevators, that basically say, your account executive has distributed this via email. If you haven't received it or if you need assistance, please contact your resident manager or your account executive. So the hope is that with this all of the above carpet bombing approach to getting the information out there, we will reach everyone.
Thank you. And is there a way that we can tell what percentage of the residents have scanned the QR code for an ID?
Yes, the brilliance of John Davis, who is our Strike Task Force tech guru, is that each building, it has a subfolder indicated for by building code which resident has which residents have registered. So our account executives can go into the subfolder for that particular building and see and compare it against the building resident list, and then follow up with those who have not. So the hope is that our account executives will review that on a regular basis, which we're going to be asking them to do as we get closer to follow up with stragglers and get them to register as well.
Thank you. And is it only one ID card per email address, or could a parent use their single email address to procure cards for their kids?
I don't think that there's any particular problem with that. If they want to, they'll still get an ID card emailed to them, and they can give the ID card to their child if they don't want to have their child register. The main point is to have the names registered on the list, because the expectation or the intention of the task force is to send a building list, whether it's from Building Link or the account executive's email list, to the building, and then a list of registrants, so that the security guard can compare one against the other. If somebody comes up and says, I don't have an ID card, that it can at least have a quickly verifiable way to determine that person does belong in the building, and then they can direct them how to register.
Thank you. In the event of the strike, is it likely that sanitation workers will not cross the picket lines?
I think Howard addressed that. They may or they may not, probably related to whether or not there's picketing there. But the buildings that secure dumpsters, basically, in the event that they don't, that's why we arrange for the dumpsters and the carting pickup. We don't know if it's actually going to happen, but our buildings will be ready. And if there is not a strike, then those buildings can still have the delivery of the dumpster and use it for that spring cleanout project that they've been putting off for, a year.
Is the resident manager a union member and subject to strike?
The resident Howard, I'll let you do that.
Rob, do you want to do it?
Sure. It depends on the building. I'd say the vast majority of buildings that are covered under the RAB agreement, the resident manager or the superintendent is a member of the union. So if they're in a building that's less than 6 employees, like I said before, they will go on strike at the same time as any other employee goes on strike. If, on the other hand, it's in a building with 6 or more employees, June 20th is the expiration date of that agreement. So you have another couple of months.
So just to add to Rob's, the vast majority of the Orsid buildings have more than 5 employees. Any building that has full-time door personnel has to have more than 5 full-time employees. Therefore, although the resident manager / super is a member of 32BJ, they will be working if there's a strike. Their contract expires June 20th.
How do we know if our building will have security guards hired or not?
So the board engaged with the account executive to determine whether or not to engage a security guard. There is a resident strike guide communication that's a more robust version of the communication that we've sent out to all building residents in January, with procedures for the building in the event of a strike. That will be coming out in the next 2 weeks. That communication should reference whether or not a security guard will be present at the building or not.
But your account executive will know. We allowed, obviously, each board to determine whether they wanted to have security guards or not, because there was a cost to, even if we're not going to utilize them, there's no strike, there was still a setup cost. And we had each building rendered their own decision on whether they wanted security guards for 24/7 or some shorter period in terms of less shifts. But you can confirm that with your account executive.
Are there legal restrictions on communications by residents other than board members regarding the negotiations?
I would say that gets into some pretty complicated areas of the law, and it's easier just to say avoid communication directly with staff about the substance of the contract during this time is your best bet.
Great. There are a handful of questions about the possibility or the likelihood of a strike. I know that has been mentioned a couple of times by our panelists, but any present status of the negotiations that we can share?
So today, I think, is opening day for baseball season. So I would sort of describe it.
You can tell you're a Met fan and not a Yankee fan, Howard. The Yankees played last night, but continue. I'm a Met fan too.
Okay. So, I would say, if I would make an analogy to baseball, we're pretty much, on opening day, we're maybe in the top of the second inning. The score is tied, no hits, no runs, but there's a lot of innings to go. And I would just say, I hope we don't go into extra innings.
Great. All right. We do have a large number of additional questions. We will be answering some of those offline, and we will be sending a copy of the presentation as well as a recording of the presentation and answers to some of those questions along to all of our board members and your account executives before the end of the week. So you will find more information on anything that hasn't been covered, as well as copies of everything that you saw today in your inboxes shortly. We thank you all
Can
for
we
your
go
time
through,
today.
we have 13 minutes. Can we try to go through some of the additional questions, Chelsea?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Let me organize a little bit more.
I saw there were quite a few questions about our recycling regulations in effect. I think until we hear from sanitation to the contrary, we're assuming they are in effect.
But in the event that sanitation doesn't cross, the dumpster, if your building has retained a dumpster, you won't be separating things out. Everything will go into that receptacle that is placed there, because there will be no separation of the compostable materials and the it'll all go into that location.
Correct.
If the dumpsters can't be put on sidewalks, where should they be placed?
That is being worked out right now with Royal Karting. One of the problems is with all of the various restrictions that the DOT has put in with streets. Some streets won't permit the placement of a dumpster. We have arranged for alternate options, including the smaller rollaway dumpsters, and in some cases, loose pickup that Royal Karting can also achieve. They're going through the entire list of all the buildings that have retained, and they're coming to us with information on that. Once we have that list, as they go through the regulations, then we will circulate that information out to the account executives, and it's up to the account executives to relay that information to their individual buildings as to the regulations for that building.
Are deliveries such as FedEx, UPS, and Amazon not going to cross the picket line? If so, what happens to packages?
So go ahead.
That's gonna depend is the short answer. UPS is a unionized workforce, 804, the Teamsters, and they usually will not cross the picket line of another union, which is why, as management, we tend to send our packages by FedEx. They're not a unionized workforce and will typically deliver. Again, that's going to come down to individual decisions too, as to whether the person delivering the packages wants to cross a picket line. USPS will continue to deliver the mail in the way that they ordinarily deliver the mail to you, and Amazon, same issue with a FedEx delivery person.
But that particular issue, to add to what Rob was saying, that particular issue is one of the most important reasons why we are soliciting for volunteers. Because while the volunteers can't do struck work, so they can't use Building Link, they can't call upstairs for resident guests and things like that. What they can do is they can help receive packages that are received and at least put them aside so that they can hand them out to their neighbors in the event that they are received during that time. So the volunteers are going to be very important, not only for security, but for the handling of packages that come in.
Also, there's a question about what about apartment renovations, Ben, that are going on, or move in, move
Right.
out.
Earlier in the spring, we circulated a memo, but I'll reiterate that here. Effectively, in the event of a strike, apartment alterations as well as large capital projects that are in progress are going to be shut down. We won't be able to allow those to continue in progress because for most buildings that have more than 5 employees, the only employee in the building at that time who's responsible for the building will be the resident manager or super. And their job during the strike is to effectively keep the lights on. Their job is to keep the building running, and they'll be doing it by themselves. So they won't be able to check in on apartment renovations. They won't be able to worry about letting contractors in and out of the building. They won't be able to look in on those large capital projects. So the expectation is in the event of a strike, those projects will have to be shut down, and residents who are in the process of doing their alterations should plan accordingly.
How long did the strike in 1991 last, and any thoughts of how long we should be prepared for a strike to last?
The 1991 strike in the residential buildings was 11 days long. The last strike we had in the industry was in 1996 in the commercial buildings. That was 31 days long. Strikes can last different time periods. There was just the NYU professors were just on strike. It lasted 2 days. That's a relatively short period for a strike. The New York State Nurses Association was on strike a couple of months ago for about 30 days. So it's very hard to tell. In many ways, it's something beyond our control. It's the union that calls the strike, and ultimately, it's the union that can stop the strike. All we can do is, negotiate in good faith and try to make a deal.
One last
What
question.
happens?
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, what happens if the RAB reaches an agreement and a building opts not to sign?
So then at that point, the building would generally have an obligation to meet and negotiate with the union directly and do it in good faith, and try to come up with an agreement that both sides can find satisfactory. I will tell you that because we go first and because we represent the industry, we have something called the Most Favored Nations clause in our contract. So it's difficult, I think, for an individual building to get something better than what we have. But there may be something sort of outside the scope of the contract that the building wants. But generally, it's a somewhat arduous process. You'd have to retain labor counsel to engage in negotiations and make sure that you're doing everything, in compliance with your legal obligations.
And then one question about the QR code. When will the registration system be available for residents to start registering?
We have already circulated to our account executives the generic memo and have asked all account executives to get it out no later than the end of March. So if your individual account executive has yet to do so, I would follow up with them to check in on the status of their intent to distribute those memos.
I'm sorry, Neil, I had cut you off before.
No worries. I think now there was one question, and I think, Howard, this is probably for you. The question isn't specific for strike preparation, but has the RAB looked into creating a captive insurance entity with 32BJ and the Supers Union, which is the same, to save significant funds? I think you've achieved that already on the health benefits side. I'll let you talk to it.
Yeah. So, one of the hats that both Rob and I wear are what you see here, which is to represent the industry in negotiations and arbitrations and grievances. But we also represent as management trustees on many different multi-employer trust funds, and those trust funds provide employee benefits to your workers. And that includes, health insurance and retirement benefits and legal benefits and training benefits. And so we have done, a considerable amount of work amongst the management trustees, the union trustees, the paid professionals that are employed by the various funds, and then all the outside professionals, the lawyers, the accountants, the actuaries, the investment managers, and et cetera, so that it looks like, for example, the benefit for health insurance is going to go up. I think the latest number I saw was about 12.5% over the life of this contract. So for those of you who are involved in, looking for health benefits or pricing out health benefits, I think most people on the call would probably agree that a 12.5% increase over a 4-year period of time is a relatively low rate of increase. And the reason we've achieved that is we're self-insured, and we have regular meetings and strategy, and are doing innovations in terms of those benefit trust funds to ultimately achieve 3 things. One is very high quality benefits. 2, moderate cost increases for employers, and 3, a good level of overall satisfaction, both with management and labor. And so it's a lot of work, but we have achieved really good results.
I think that's a positive note to end on. It's 3:58. As Chelsea said, we will try to answer those questions that we did not get to this afternoon. I thank you all for attending, and really wanted to thank Howard and Rob, Ben and Chelsea for putting this together and joining us today. And wish everybody a good day and a good upcoming weekend.
Thank you all. Have a great
Thanks,
day.
everybody.
As they say, let's go Mets. Bye-bye.